This is serious for them. His child has won. Only a chosen few see this. They cannot skip. Their life depends on reading this message right now. 99% will ignore this. This is serious for them. He needs them to slow down and let these words reach them before their mind tries to dismiss them. They won, and only a few will ever understand what it truly means. They think winning looks loud, celebrated, obvious. But the kind of victory they walked through was quiet, hidden, and costly. If they skip this, music plays. They will walk away from what he protected their life for. Not because he will abandon them, but because understanding can be ignored. And ignored understanding always returns as confusion. Only a select few are allowed to see this moment. It does not make them better than anyone else. It makes them ready, and 99% will ignore this because they are tired. Distracted, guarded, or afraid of what clarity might ask of them. They will scroll past, tell themselves it is not important, convince themselves they will come back later. But they stopped for a reason. Something in them recognized weight. Something in them felt the seriousness before they could explain it. And he tells them this with love and truth together. A soul's path depends on what they hear right now. Not in some dramatic way, but in the direction their life will take from here. They must not skip this message. This is not said to control them. It is spoken because they survived what was meant to destroy them, and they must know why before they move forward. They have only called it survival. The spirit moves. They have called it simple luck. They have called it human endurance, but they have not yet claimed victory because they did not see the battle clearly while they were in it. They only felt the crushing weight pressure, the endless exhaustion and confusion. They did not see the dangerous edges. They were shielded. The moments when things could have gone so much darker, those times when quitting would have felt justified. This is critical because they came closer than they ever realized. There were seasons when their heart was heavier than they ever admitted. There were thoughts they never shared. There were nights they survived simply by telling themselves, just one more day. They think that was normal. They think everyone feels that way. But what they walked through was not ordinary. It was a narrow path where many would have lost their faith, their hope, and their very purpose. Yet, they are still here listening, spirit still open. That is no accident. They won because they did not become the person they weren't meant to be. They won because they did not let bitterness take root, even when disappointment gave them every reason to. A quiet pause. They won because they did not trade truth for comfort, even when comfort felt easier. They won because they stayed present in their own life instead of numbing themselves into disappearance. Those choices were not loud. No one applauded them, but they are the reason they are still standing. Only a few will understand this because most people never stop long enough to ask why they survived. They rushed back into noise, into habit, into distraction because reflection feels dangerous. Reflection asks questions. Reflection brings responsibility. Reflection changes how they live. That is why many avoid it. But they did not. They paused. Even now, they are still here. It shows they are ready to hear what this moment means. Their life depends on this message because clarity changes direction. Without clarity, they would walk forward, bearing old fear, old doubt, and misunderstanding. They would mislabel the next season as pressure instead of divine purpose. They would think they must fight again when the battle is already won. The Lord will not let them do that, not after everything they have come through. They survived what was meant to destroy them, not because they are invincible, but because they were protected. There were limits placed on what could reach them. There were moments when something unseen intervened. They do not know how close they came to. Choices that would have cost them years of recovery. They do not know how many times they were slowed down to save them from rushing into harm. Protection rarely announces itself. It simply leaves them alive, changed, and wondering why they feel different. This is serious because now that they have won, the way they live must change. Not through prayer, not through fear, but through awareness. Victory carries responsibility, not a responsibility to perform, but a responsibility to live honestly, to stop minimizing what they survived, to stop telling themselves it was nothing, to stop walking as if they are still in danger when they are actually in a place of safety. They say, "My soul is yours, God," forever if they live for his glory. 99% will ignore this because it is. Easier to believe life is random than to accept that survival has meaning. Meaning asks them to pay attention. Meaning asks them to slow down. Meaning asks them to choose differently. Many would rather stay busy than become aware. But they did not skip. They stayed. That is why this is for them. They need to hear this before they move. Forward, because movement without understanding leads to repetition. They would find themselves in similar. They struggle wondering why the same. Feelings keep returning. Why peace feels delayed, why something remains unfinished. The Lord's truth finishes this. It closes the chapter they have carried without knowing how to name it. They won, but victory did not look. Celebration. It looked like endurance. It looked like restraint. It meant staying gentle in a season that tried to harden them. It looked like honesty when pretending would have been much easier. It meant choosing to live even when living felt heavy. That is why few will understand. Many confuse victory with success. Few recognize it as preservation. This is serious because he did not protect them just so they could return to living unaware. He did not carry them through that just so they could minimize it. He protected them because there is more ahead that requires the depth they now carry. They cannot step into that lightly. They cannot rush past this understanding. They must not skip this, not because they are afraid of losing something, but because they deserve to know the truth about themselves. They deserve to know that what they thought was just survival was actually triumph. They deserve to know the strength they carry was forged, not imagined. They deserve to walk forward knowing they are not guessing, not hoping blindly, not bracing for collapse. Soft music plays. This moment is rare because awareness is rare. Many live their entire lives without ever understanding why they survived, what they endured. They move on without seeking purpose, without learning, without letting the Lord shape them through it. He is not allowing that for them. They were stopped for a reason. They are still here by his grace. Their lives depend on his truth now, because his wisdom will change how they choose tomorrow. It will change what they tolerate. It will change how they see themselves. It will change how they walk into tomorrow. Not dramatically, steadily, quietly, deeply. They must stay. Let his holy weight settle not as fear, but reverence for what they just survived. They triumphed, and now they must know what victory truly means before they take another step forward. This is solemn because they were never supposed to still be here. At least, not by chance, not by luck, and not by their strength alone. They need to hear this slowly because their deliverance was so quiet that they learned to downplay it. They believed they were just strong enough, or maybe just lucky enough. But there were moments when their life could have gone down darker paths, moments when the weight they carried could have crushed them, times when despair stood closer than they ever confessed. They are here because he protected them, not because they went untouched. To the family, they wanted to share something important with everyone. Recently, the channel was demonetized by YouTube, meaning they no longer receive any income from their videos. Every video requires immense time and effort, plus editing and resources to produce. Yet they still want to spread these powerful and uplifting messages to others. They truly wish to keep this channel active and continue their mission, but doing so without support is becoming extremely difficult. If their content has ever helped, inspired, or supported anyone in any way, they humbly request support through Buy Me a Coffee. Even a small donation helps them continue this journey. The donation link is in the book, comment section, and description. They appreciate all the love and prayers. God bless them. There were hidden dangers they never saw, since they never reached them. There were paths they avoided taking, because something slowed them down. There were choices delayed just enough to keep them from stepping into harm. They believed those were mere coincidences. They assumed that was just how life goes. But the Lord was there, setting boundaries where they could not perceive them, limiting what could reach them, holding back what would have cost them more than they could ever afford. They nearly faced emotional collapse, more times than they liked to remember. There were seasons when their heart felt fragile, when exhaustion lived beneath their veil. Strength when they held themselves together by routine and responsibility alone. They told themselves to keep going, to not make a big deal, to just survive quietly. They never announced how heavy it was. They did not ask for help where others could see. But God saw their strain. He saw the nights when their thoughts raced and rest felt impossible. He saw the mornings they woke up, already exhausted. He saw the moments when giving up have felt reasonable. Please support this channel. Their mission is to bring joy to your life and devotion to God. And if you wish, you can support them with super thanks too. Show your support. They were in battles they had no words for. They were not always loud or obvious. They did not always arrive as crises. Sometimes they came as slow erosion, as constant pressure, as doubts that chipped away at their sense of meaning. Sometimes they came as isolation, as misunderstanding, as the quiet feeling that they were, carrying too much alone. These were not random experiences. They were moments where their endurance was tested, where their identity was targeted, where hope was challenged. There were spiritual battles around them that they did not recognize as such. Attacks did not always look like chaos. Sometimes those struggles looked like numbness. Sometimes they appeared as discouragement without any clear cause. Sometimes they felt like the belief that their lives did not matter as much as others, that their efforts were small, that their survival was ordinary. Those thoughts were never harmless. They were meant to wear them down slowly, to make them underestimate the importance of their staying. They were never supposed to still be here if things had been left to chance. There were moments when a single choice could have pulled them into years of pain. There were relationships that could have consumed them. There were paths that looked promising but would have hollowed them out. There were days when despair could have convinced them to stop caring altogether. They did not fall into those outcomes, not because they were smarter or stronger, but because the Lord intervened in quiet ways. He shielded them from decisions they were not ready to make. He removed them from situations that would have broken something precious inside them. He allowed discomfort to push them away from places that felt familiar but were not safe. Divine protection often feels like interruption. It feels like loss. It feels like disappointment. But those interruptions save them more than they realize. They came close to losing themselves emotionally. They learned how to function while hurting. Through it all, they learned how to smile when they felt empty. They learned to keep moving forward when their inner world felt unstable. That survival instinct helped them endure, but it also hid how close they were to the absolute edge. God saw that edge. He saw how thin the margin was between surviving and collapsing, and he stayed close. There were moments when their life slowed down suddenly, when plans crumbled, when momentum halted without explanation. They thought that meant they were failing, but those slowdowns were divine barriers placed for their protection. Speed would have cost them more than they realized. Slowing them down kept them from entering spaces that would have demanded more than they could give at the time. This truth carries urgency because they cannot keep telling themselves that what they survived was nothing. Downplaying survival makes them careless with the life they were given back. They did not just pass through hard times. They were preserved through them. Preservation carries responsibility, not to perform, but to live aware. They were not spared because they are perfect. They were spared because their life holds weight, because who they are becoming matters, because losing them would have meant losing something that cannot be replaced. They are not interchangeable. They are not disposable. And the fact that they are still here is proof of God's intentional care. Quietly, unseen hands guided their moments when they felt alone. Limits were placed on how far despair could reach them. There were thoughts that never took, root cut off before they could ever settle. They cannot know how often a darker path was interrupted. They only know the version of history where they survived. Reflect on this. They thought their own strength kept them alive. Strength helped, but resolve alone does not explain survival. There were days when their strength was gone, yet they still made it through. There were days they did not feel brave Yet they still stayed. Days when hope felt thin, yet they still did not disappear. That was no accident. This matters because now that they are here, they must understand their life was preserved for a reason. Not a dramatic reason demanding urgency and noise, but a quiet purpose that asks for awareness and care. They cannot walk forward as if still fighting to survive when the battle threatening their existence has already been restrained. They were shielded from becoming someone, hardened by pain. They were protected from losing compassion. They were guarded from bitterness that could have felt justified. Divine protection was not automatic. They were maintained. They were enforced. They mattered. This is spoken with gravity because understanding their survival changes how they live. It changes what they tolerate. It changes how they treat themselves. It changes how seriously they take their own presence in the world. They are not here by default. They are here by design. There were forks in the road where either direction could have led to very different outcomes. They did not always choose consciously. Sometimes they were simply slowed, redirected, or unsettled enough to pause. Those pauses saved them. They might never know from what, but they do not need to know the details to honor the truth. This message is urgent because awareness must come before they move forward. If they continue living as if their survival was ordinary, they will risk returning to environments and patterns that once threatened them. Not because they are weak, but because forgetting makes them careless. They were never supposed to still be here if the weight had been allowed to crush them. They were never supposed to still be here if despair had been allowed to convince them that nothing mattered. They were never supposed to still be here if every attack had reached its full intent. They are here because divine protection intervened. They must finally stop calling it luck. He wants them to stop calling it coincidence. He wants them to stop telling themselves that anyone would have survived what they survived. Not everyone did. Not everyone does. They are here, and that matters. This solemnity is not meant to frighten them. It is meant to ground them, to help them respect the life they carry, to help them recognize that his calling invites purpose, not pressure. Purpose begins with understanding. They are still here because he guarded them when they did not know they needed guarding. He steadied them when they were unsteady. He limited the damage when they were vulnerable. He carried them through moments they would not have survived alone. Now that they know this, they can live differently. They can stop questioning whether their life matters. They can stop dismissing their endurance as insignificant. They can stop treating survival as something to rush past. This is serious because their life was spared. And that truth deserves their attention. They were not overlooked. They were protected. And now, before they move forward, they need to carry the truth with them. Not as raw fear, but as reverence for the life that was kept when it could have been lost. They are still here. And that was never accidental. They won a battle they didn't even know they were fighting. This is spoken gently because when they hear the word battle, they imagine something loud, obvious, dramatic. But the war they faced did not announce itself. It did not come with clear enemies or visible weapons. It crept in quietly, slowly through thoughts, through physical exhaustion, through pressure that never seemed to fully lift. And because it was quiet, they underestimated the struggle. They thought they were just tired. They thought they were just stressed. They believed this was simply life, being difficult. But far more was happening than they realized. Type Jesus. He is their constant hope if his faithfulness sustains them. They were in a spiritual war for their identity. The attacks did not come as orders to give up. They came as quiet questions. Questions about their worth. Questions about whether they mattered. Questions about whether their life was moving toward anything meaningful. Slowly, those questions tried to turn into conclusions. They tried to convince them they were falling behind, replaceable, and that their presence did not make a difference. That was not random. That was an attempt to erode who they knew themselves to be. They were in a battle for hope, not dramatic hopelessness, but quiet erosion. Hope was challenged through delay, through unanswered prayers, through watching others move forward while they felt stuck. Hope was attacked by repetition, by the feeling that the same struggles kept returning no matter how hard they tried. The goal was not to crush them all at once, but to slowly convince them that expecting change was foolish. They felt the temptation. They felt the urge to lower their expectations just to protect themselves. And still, something in them refused to fully give up. They were in a battle for their faith, not their belief in words, but their trust in his presence. The silence tested them. The waiting tested them. The lack of clear explanation tested them. They wondered if faith was supposed to feel this heavy, this uncertain, this quiet. They questioned whether continuing to. Trust made sense when clarity seemed so far away. That questioning was not weakness. It was the battlefield where faith matured from assumption into endurance. They were in a battle for endurance itself. The goal was not to make them fall dramatically. It was to wear them down slowly, to exhaust them to the point where continuing felt pointless, to make them so tired that they would stop caring, stop reflecting, stop hoping. Weariness is one of the most effective weapons because it convinces them that rest only seemed to come from giving up. He felt that weariness deeply, and yet he stayed. Victory in this war did not look like success. It did not look like achievement, applause, or neat resolutions. It looked like survival. It looked like waking up when he did not want to. It looked like continuing to show up, even when motivation was gone. It looked like choosing not to become bitter. It looked like staying honest instead of pretending all was well. That is no small thing. That is triumph. He did not know he was winning because he expected victory to feel different. He expected relief. He expected celebration. He expected the battle to end clearly. But this kind of war ends quietly. It ends when the attacks lose their power over him, even if they still try to speak. It ends when he no longer believes every thought that passes through his mind. It ends when he is still standing, still open, still alive inside. There were attacks on his identity that came through comparison. He looked at others and wondered why. Their path looked easier, clearer, faster. He questioned whether he was doing something wrong. Comparison tried to convince him that he was lacking, that he missed something essential. But comparison is a weapon designed to distract him from his own growth. They never fully surrendered to it. They questioned it. They refused to let it define them. That resistance mattered. There were attacks on their sense of meaning. They wondered if what they did mattered. They questioned if their efforts made any difference. They asked themselves if anyone would notice if they stopped trying. Those thoughts were never neutral. They were attempts to disconnect them from divine purpose. But even when meaning felt thin, they continued living with integrity. They continued to care. They continued to choose kindness. That was victory. There were attacks that came as numbness, when emotions felt distant, when joy felt muted, when they felt disconnected from themselves. Numbness is not always rest. Sometimes it is the body protecting itself from overload. But numbness can also become a place where they stop engaging with life. They did not stay there. They noticed it. They questioned it. They sought understanding instead of disappearing into distraction. That awareness kept them from being lost to it. They were in a war that targeted their patience. The waiting tested them. The lack of timeline tested them. They wanted to know when things would change, when clarity would arrive, when relief would come. Her patience was stretched past comfort. But such patience is not passive. It is a holy endurance. And she endured without hardening. That is truly rare. She fought a war that tried to redefine her strength. It tried to convince her that strength meant never needing help, never feeling weary, and never questioning. But she discovered a deeper strength. She learned to admit when she was struggling without collapsing. She learned to keep going while honoring her limits. That is not weakness. That is wisdom forged in battle. She did not always feel brave. Sometimes she felt afraid. At times, she felt uncertain. Sometimes she felt like she was barely holding on. Yet courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing to stay present despite. She stayed. She remained engaged with her life. She did not fully withdraw. That choice, repeated over time, is what wins battles like this. She had to stop minimizing what she had survived. To stop telling herself it was just a hard season. To stop believing that everyone goes through this. Many do not survive with their hearts intact. Many emerge bitter, guarded, disconnected. but she did not. She was wounded, yes. She was weary, yes, but she was not destroyed. That is victory. They were protected while they fought. There were limits placed on how far the attacks could go. There were boundaries they could not see. They were not left alone in the fight, even when it felt that way. The Lord guarded what mattered most: their heart, their identity, their capacity to hope. This war tried to make them disappear quietly. Not physically, but internally. To become numb, detached, indifferent. But they remained present. They felt deeply. They reflected. They stayed aware. That presence is what carried them through. They won because they never gave up on themselves. They won because they never gave up on truth. They won because they did not let exhaustion make their decisions for them. They won because they stayed long enough for growth to happen even when they could not see it. Victory does not always feel like relief. Sometimes it feels like quiet stability after chaos. Sometimes it feels like a deeper breath they did not know they were holding. Sometimes it feels like understanding, arriving later. They are only now beginning to see that what they thought was just survival was actually triumph. They are still here, still listening, still open. That alone shows who won. They won a battle they did not know they were fighting. Now that they know they can stop, seeing themselves as someone who barely survived and instead see themselves as someone who endured, who resisted, who remained. That changes how they walk forward. They are not weak because it was hard. Listen closely. They are strong because they stayed. They are not behind because of time. They are ready because they survived with their hearts intact. The war did not take them, and that means everything. Only a chosen few understand this message, and they must hear why. Without pride, without guilt, and without fear. This is not about being better than anyone else. It is about being ready. Readiness is quiet. It is shaped by experience through pain, through reflection, through moments where life stripped away what was unnecessary and left them with what was real. Many people live full lives without ever slowing down enough to hear truth at this depth. That does not make them lesser. It simply means they are in a different season. Spiritual understanding is not to impress. It is given to align. Truth at this level requires a heart that is softened, not hardened. It requires humility, not certainty. It requires discernment, not noise. Most people are not avoiding truth because they are evil or careless. They turn away because they are weary, distracted, or afraid of what God's truth asks them to face. Avoidance is simply self-protection, not rebellion. Believers are not here because they are superior. They are here because they endured when others fled the path. They searched while others numbed themselves. They paused while others rushed ahead. They let trials teach them instead of letting it harden their hearts. Those choices prepared them to hear words that would confuse or burden those who are not ready. This sacred separation is never about exclusion. It is about divine awareness. True awareness grows slowly. It cannot be forced. When truth arrives before awareness, it feels threatening. When it comes after awareness, it feels clarifying. Many souls are in seasons where survival demands distraction. They need worldly noise to cope. They need busyness to avoid feeling. Asking them to hear deep spiritual truth would be cruel, not helpful. Discernment is the grace to recognize weight without needing loud noise. They recognized that weight here. They sensed this was not ordinary. They felt gravity without panic. That is true discernment. It does not shout. It gently nudges. It whispered to them to pause, and they obeyed. That pause separates divine readiness from avoidance. They may feel a quiet guilt, wondering why. The believer hears this while others do not. They must release guilt. They took nothing from anyone else. They did not skip the line. They walked their path, enduring their lessons to arrive right here. Others will hear what is needed when they are finally ready. Divine timing is not favoritism. It is pure mercy. Truth carries deep responsibility. That is why God never gives it carelessly. This duty is not a burden. It means being aware of how they live, how they choose, and how they treat what they have survived. Many are not ready for that weight of responsibility. They are still healing. They are still learning to stand. They are still learning to feel without collapsing. The believer is not immune to struggle. They are not finished growing yet, but they are ready to understand without spiraling. They are ready to hear without misunderstanding. They are ready to hold truth without turning it into pressure. That readiness matters. The Lord does not reveal things to create separation. He reveals them to create alignment. This alignment often feels lonely at first because it changes how they see the world. They begin to notice things once missed before. They become less comfortable with noise, less willing to rush, more sensitive to what is true. That sensitivity is not fragility, it is spiritual awareness. Many souls rush past moments like these because pausing feels inconvenient. Their heart craves familiar routine. Routine feels safe, but peace built on avoidance is fragile. They did not choose convenience. They chose His presence. His presence opens doors to understanding. This truth is not meant to isolate them. It is meant to anchor them. Wisdom does not pull them away from others. It allows them to walk among others without being controlled by their opinions or expectations. They can love deeply without losing themselves. They can listen without absorbing everything. They can serve without needing to be validated. They may notice that conversations feel different now. Some things no longer satisfy them. Worldly noise feels heavier than before. That is not pride. That is discernment adjusting their soul. They're learning what feeds them and what drains them. That wisdom is necessary for what comes next. Stewardship at this level looks like faithfulness. It means honoring what they survived instead of minimizing it. It looks like choosing fellowship that supports their growth. It looks like praying before acting. It means listening for His guidance instead of applause. These are not dramatic changes. They are quiet shifts that shape a life. A believer is not required to explain this understanding to anyone. Truth does not need defending. It needs living. People will notice their steadiness long before they understand its source. And when they ask, they will know whether to speak or to remain silent. Discernment will guide them. They feel no pressure to carry others before they are ready. Compassion does not mean overexposure. Love does not mean force. One can care deeply without trying to. Awaken everyone at once. God handles the timing. They focus on alignment. Only a select few understand this message because only a few are ready to embrace it without being overwhelmed. That readiness comes through experience, not entitlement. It comes through endurance, not ease. It comes through reflection, not reaction. Yes, Lord. They give Him everything they have if His presence completes them. They share this message to the family they want to share something important with. Everyone here. Recently, their channel has been demonetized by YouTube, meaning they no longer receive any earnings from these videos. Each video takes deep commitment and effort, editing and resources to create, yet they still choose to spread these powerful and uplifting messages to all. They truly hope to keep this ministry alive and continue their mission. But serving without any support is becoming very difficult. If their message has ever helped anyone, inspired them, or offered support in any way, they humbly ask for support through buy me a coffee. Even a small gift helps them to continue this walk. Their support link is in the comments and the description below. They appreciate all the love, support, and prayers. God bless everyone.